Imagine for a moment that one knew a method for sending peace where it is needed in our world. If this already sounds like quite a challenge, know that it is, specifically, the challenge. The challenge presented at sendthempeace.com. If such a methodology existed, what would it look like? Where does one begin? What steps must one take? Where does such a path lead? Where could one find a guide who knows the way? There is a flow and direction on this path. New practices need an orientation. They require finding the feelings that guide us in the right direction, a discovery that certain adopted principles allow us to live big, tools to help us with the work, and finally, attaining a result of unity as we meet the challenge, and it is ours. There are steps one can number. There are names one can place on the steps along the path. Imagine further that 12 steps along this path have already begun defining themselves. Imagine that one could write a word or a phrase in each of these empty circles, a heading that one should follow like a compass needle to acquire this method for sending them peace. One might like that. A protection from getting lost along the way, like a chalk mark on a tree in a forest, a chalk mark that we recognize as being placed there for us, and that we find with relief and follow comfortably. Let's see where this path leads. Each step along the way is a presence, a state of awareness to be cultivated as best one can, and before moving too quickly on to the next. Do not worry that this will take a lifetime. Soon, you will be a peace warrior, sending them peace with great precision to a needy target, a place where peace and compassion are sorely lacking, a place which will most gratefully receive your gift of peace. The challenge is aimed at sharing an awareness arising more in feeling than thought. So to begin, you should feel like an invited guest. You should feel welcomed. You should sense yourself joining a giant crowd. You should notice the smiles of others as they look upon you. Even if they know nothing about you, they know that you have come, motivated like them, by a desire to address the needs of others, and which are ultimately at some level your own needs as well. Their soft smiles, as you move among them, help you to feel grateful for being who you are. What is the reaction of most after joining a giant crowd? One asks, "Wow, what is happening here? What are all these people doing? What is going to happen here?" Where do the answers come from? From having read the challenge and some factual information about the current target for the challenge. This information accrual does not have to be encyclopedic. This is not a preparation for a doctoral thesis. Why is this step needed at all? It prepares one by providing knowledge about the current target. And while gaining this awareness, our feelings about the suffering present at that location are also being formed. Your rapid flyover of the target was structured to be easy to do. You did not have to buy a plane ticket, nor reserve a hotel room, so you could go see for yourself the suffering felt by those whose lives in the target are daily challenged. Nevertheless, because the target is always a place of need, your review most certainly captured this. And what did you feel for these unknown faces? Perhaps a sense of sadness, or even disbelief that such environments actually exist. Even relief that this is not your environment. Perhaps pity. These reactions are aimed at protecting you from your sense of sadness. Pity separates you as viewer from the feelings of the person living in the reality you have witnessed. Do not stay separated in this way. Set fear aside and move beyond your kind sympathy to what follows. In your studies of the target, did you catch yourself at times walking in your mind's eye through the landscape of the target? Did you respond to the challenges you viewed there, with feeling thirsty when water was nowhere to be found, or crushed upon returning to a home you sensed was somehow yours, only to find it destroyed and your belongings strewn over the street? Did you begin to feel the blows raining upon your face when walking through a prison camp? Did you see someone whom you were sure you recognized and feel deeply concerned for their safety? Did your tour of the hospital leave you afraid you might have caught something infectious? Or rather, and only because of your conscious decision to open to this, that the discomfort of those with all manner of wounds was born in your heart as well? Did you see someone with an extremity in a cast and recall that you had once had the same, and in that instant recall how good it had felt when someone had come close enough to share your emotional discomfort at that time? What would it take to allow oneself to actually feel another's suffering? An open and courageous heart. An empathic heart, one willing to accept and share the experience of pain borne by another. Isn't that enough? Or does the challenge require even more? The lotus of self now begins to open on compassion. You may have noticed during your studies, acquiring knowledge of the target, and after as you began to feel this knowledge, that the suffering you perceived and felt informed two components of human existence: our ability to be and our ability to do, both deeply affected by suffering. Great suffering fully occupies the human spirit, so that simply being is about all that one can manage. Doing seems to soon fall by the wayside. The energy for doing is now all consumed by the need of just being, by the seemingly inescapable demands of living our suffering. Doing slows and may cease altogether. Psychiatry has a term for this: psychomotor retardation, a recognizable phenomenon or symptom. A state where the simplest task is just too much. Yet, there are things to get done. And the more our environment fills with sources of suffering, the harder it seems to be to address each thing that must get done. Ask anyone who has survived a war, a major hurricane, a violent attack, a major traffic accident. And in viewing this from either close up or from a distance, in that moment one's heart, if properly prepared, senses a beautiful opportunity. Physiologists will disagree with my suggestion of the organ involved, but it is as though suffering has been deeply inhaled through one's heart. Once enclosed in this loving home, very quickly the suffering is sensed and now repaired, and in breathing out from the heart, the repair takes place. It manifests in action, usually with a sense of immediacy, with no further reason to hesitate. A chance to do for someone lost in the being of suffering, the doing that he or she can no longer do, for whatever reason, for himself or herself. This may begin in a simple, straightforward, rational thought. This or that is needed here. But if arising in the origins of compassionate action, it quickly passes into a vivid feeling that encompasses and embodies with startling clarity the certainty that placing that feeling into action is the right thing to do, the only thing to do. So one does. For whom? For the being lost in suffering, friend or not, human, or for another living creature. This is a manifestation of our ability to feel and externalize love, probably our greatest asset while we breathe and share our current form. So now, in this fifth presence, one comes to understand that compassion is simply placing love into action. That must be a component of the wisdom that is central to living well for ourselves and others. Do not worry about how much such right action might seem to cost you personally. In practice, such actions most often cost little or nothing. The challenge is but one example. Helping someone in need with small daily tasks might be another. The universe declares that you will be more than handsomely rewarded. It may not be a monetary fortune. It could be sometimes, but rather one that contains all fortunes, when divisiveness in our world becomes unity through the practice of compassion. If you are afraid that your practice of compassionate action might bankrupt you, if not financially, emotionally, or spiritually, let me reassure you, we are living in an abundant universe, and if water shortages and lands turning into deserts and famine and disappearing living spaces for polar bears and deforestation, among other problems of, quote, not enough, close quotes, makes you want to argue the point, those are all physical or material deficits in the presence of abundance. But if humans can maintain and master a source of abundance that resides in the heart, or wherever you want to place spirit, then the rest can become, as it once was, abundant. Abundance follows compassion, because through the right action of compassion, no source of suffering need go unanswered. That very promise becomes reality when we refuse to live our fears and instead come together to overcome them. If you chronically fear illness, you will chronically prevent health. If you fear poverty, you will live a life that blocks abundance. See where your negative belief or fear lies and intentionally select and live its positive opposite. Self-compassion allows you to let go of your fear that you are not worthy of receiving. Living that fearlessly, you will find abundance personally. And through the right action of compassion, magnified through the challenge and similar actions, and setting aside wrong perceptions, our world, Earth, will be allowed to manifest its abundance anew. Start a little list of all that you are grateful for. Add items to it daily. You will soon see how abundantly giving our universe actually is. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a permanent attitude." But when our existence is so dominated by our ego-driven needs and mechanisms to protect that ego, to prove that ours is the best ego in the neighborhood, how can one possibly recover from a well-carried-out attack on our image of self? And when such attacks become threats to our very physical existence, war, terrorism, torture, unjust imprisonment, mutilation, can these be forgiven? Can a surviving child soldier ever truly recover enough to forgive this theft and loss of his innocence? And why forgive? Don't we each have a right to display and share our suffering? To attract a little compassion for ourselves from time to time? When one steps on a nail in a board and it pierces our foot, that is pain. And if the suffering, the sadness, the lack of happiness that accompanies that pain as we limp along lasts a week or two, that might be anticipated as normal. But if, unless a persistent complication of such a minor injury has arisen and made it major, if after 3 years one suffering from the nail monopolizes our conversation at every occasion and guides and limits our life, then that is no longer true suffering. It is feeding on some misguided need of the hungry ghost that our ego can become. Where is the real pain? Probably no longer in that foot. Here are 13 antonyms for forgiveness. Condemn, blame, sentence, accuse, increase, censure, punish, hold, keep, maintain, charge, cruelty, mercilessness. How do these 13 opposites of forgiveness sound to you? Do they sound like probable sources for bringing an end to suffering? Or simply tools for adding new suffering to old? What brings forgiveness? Peace. Have you ever done something in your life where you subsequently came to hope that for an unwise action you could somehow be forgiven? That process begins with acknowledging the unwise action, sitting with it until the layers of lie have been peeled away. The legal system calls that admitting one's guilt. It involves recognizing that deep inside one is still carrying a poison that leaks into our self just a bit each day. Hard to have it not spill over onto other selves at each contact. And without that affirmation, that letting go of the lie, true reconciliation may never be possible. Asking for mercy when one maintains and remains merciless is, of course, the worst of charades. Another favorite trick of the ego. Without that permission given for truth to enter, moving on may never be possible. The hideous deeds perpetrated by known individuals against others, genocide, crimes against humanity, raise the challenge to a very high level if, in addition to healing the sufferings that our target studies unfold for us, forgiving its perpetrators is also part of the agenda. Yet, it is part of the challenge. What does the challenge, and especially each of its participants, gain by such forgiveness? Freedom. The liberty to forgive is the one that remains after all others have been taken away. The freedom to move on as a species. This even after some very terrible failures at exercising our humanity. This too is included in compassionate action. Not always easy to embrace forgiveness when everyone's ego clearly knows immediately how to distinguish right from wrong, especially in others. Acceptance. This quality of presence is frequently guided by the oft-quoted insight of Reinhold Niebuhr. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Signing on for the challenge may too easily suggest to a devoted and enthusiastic practitioner, or more accurately, actor, a source of compassionate action, that we're going to heal the world, we're going to save the world, and so let's get on with it. The whole world, all its problems, now. Then we can go back to our real job on Monday. One could view this as magical thinking, envisioning that such an effort is even possible. One could also view this as extreme confidence in the challenge and its ability to bring the whole world together now. All belief should be as strong. But given the size of the problems quickly encountered in studying just a single target before sitting for the challenge, Taking on all the targets at once risks several negative outcomes. Burnout of participants in the challenge. A dilution of positive effect, making it harder to identify any effect at all. Caregiver schizophrenia, in which one begins to hear, "Why are we spending so much time on target A when target B is so much more in need of our intervention?" This loses the big picture of letting the challenge send them peace in a way that peace distributes those energies where needed, without having to worry about street and apartment numbers on the receiving end. A lost occasion to acquire and practice the serenity that Niebuhr seeks and guides us towards in his prayer. The loss, along with our surrender in the face of those things that cannot be changed now, of those that can be changed. The abandonment of a practice that promises to teach the differences to be found between these two dualities within the limits of the challenge, but also in our lives, and in our children's lives, beyond the challenge as well. Notice carefully, accepting that this challenge thing just isn't working, and it can never work, isn't acceptance. It's defeatism. If intolerance of something should ever be tolerated for even an instant, let it be a lack of tolerance for defeatism and the fears that spawn it. The ninth presence is timeliness. Preparation for the challenge was covered in the second presence. Timeliness includes not just showing up, but showing up prepared, having done one's homework. This does not mean having acquired only facts. Instead, one is seeking to acquire a deeper knowledge carried in heart, a knowledge that depends on feeling. Feeling and emotion will be our guides in what follows. If that sounds namby-pamby, know that science disagrees. More and more, neuroscientists and others are vociferously evoking that feelings and emotions are the drivers when successfully placing realities constructed by our brains into our world. A phrase frequently heard is being passionate. Looked at critically, that means feeling a positive emotion and placing it through our actions in the world. Timeliness, of course, also means being on time. This is more than neurotic obsessing. The idea is to amass a quantum of energy from a combined force of participants delivered to a specific target. So seeking to bring everyone together at 12 noon Greenwich Mean Time clearly arises in a hypothesis that this makes a difference. If transfer of energy didn't work like that, nails would be made without points. They have points. This focuses energy and increases a nail's effectiveness tremendously. Some will remind that even a single butterfly beating its wings makes a quantum, if smallish, difference somewhere in our world. I do not doubt that that is true. Then, a purely practical matter. Given the impossibility and absence of need for modeling this on a monastic practice from days gone by, half the world will be converting 12 noon Greenwich Mean Time into some pretty dark hours of the night. As one can see on the clock page, for time zones assigned from New York to Honolulu and equivalent in the Southern Hemisphere, participating instead in the challenge with a 12-hour shift, 12 a.m. midnight Greenwich Mean Time, is perfect. It forms a second squadron, assuring 2 deliveries, sending peace to the same target each day. A third invocation here of timeliness seems more obvious. This to convey a sense of, isn't it about time? Look at our world. Do you feel it? Do you sense something moving now? I am not joining with Chicken Little to shout that it's all falling asunder. Mentioned elsewhere, a historical view at the disaster that is war says that peace is winning. Violence is receding. Life expectancy continues to increase, yet with important global imbalances still. This is not the time to ease up the effort and stop sending them peace. Targets still abound, but what you may be sensing, like others, is a shift in consciousness, something better for mankind, gradually but continuously working its way into presence. Lots of authors are writing about it. The 10th presence is peacefulness, literally, filled with peace. Difficult to imagine possessing or obtaining a capacity for sending them peace if one is not at peace with oneself. So this movement into the challenge begins very much like many methods of meditation. In this setting, I label this first phase as endo-meditation, a movement towards mindfulness and self-awareness. This to distinguish from exo-meditation, which seeks to move from this centered in self starting point to a consciousness outside the self, in our world, yet with the two awarenesses still clearly united. So first, by creating and occupying a quiet space through awareness of breath and grounding in the present, one quiets thought to experience the present moment. Once established, this calm state can next welcome the feeling driver, the 11th presence. The 11th presence is the feeling driver. Movement towards the current target of the challenge is based on correctly perceiving, calling upon, and placing our emotions in the driver's seat. At first, this may seem like an exercise in negative tones, a mirror of destructiveness. Our pre-challenge readings and exposure have instructed a whole host of saddening manifestations of man's inhumanity to man. Else, the target would not be a target. All of those phenomena that display a disturbing lack of compassion and peace have now been witnessed. So now, without getting involved at all, nor lost in thought details, these are specifically, though gently, put aside. Slowly, one can now move from sympathy for the target to empathy. The 11th presence stops here. A participant sees with his mind's eye, but especially with his or her awareness, in a manner that places the suffering and sadness felt squarely in one's own feeling center. It is no longer only theirs. It is now ours as well. But before this becomes overwhelming, one becomes attuned to the protection, support, and mutual creativity and consciousness of the other participants in the challenge. No, one is not alone. A theme that carries one comfortably through time and space to the target. Streams of feeling light coming together like a magnificent fountain, exactly and precisely where needed the most. The 12th presence, compassionate action. One now experiences the realization that all of our feelings from the 11th presence, as real as they have seemed, are clearly retreating into a hologram of the past. Empathy, though admirable, has been showing us our target as it was, not only because the pictures we studied in preparation were not taken today, but because our commitment to compassionate action is already having an effect. Already, this unified action is sharing in a consciousness, an awareness that things are changing. A sense of disbelief is hard to abandon, but it is certainly so. Peace and compassion are now taking action to put order, but more importantly, to infuse love into the target. Any lesser, less evocative word would be a misstatement. And as a part of the whole, you now begin to see, but actually sense, to trust in, your feelings of clear improvements in the target. How can this be so? What is the wisdom that accomplishes such change. You bring to this experience only positive emotions, very personally yours as you have structured them. The results you are witnessing are definitely present now, and your caring for those whose suffering had been so great is now fed back to you and those with you in the light. A sense of thankfulness is expressed and deeply felt for your compassionate, caring action. And your magnificent gift remains in presence, its own blessing from the heart, now surrounded by those blessings of thankfulness and love from the recipients of your peace and compassion. See and be pleased with the beauty that you have placed in our world. How can this be? Send them peace, and it is.